And we're back in the studio, believe it or not, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday evening of July 4th weekend here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. It is great to be back here in the studio. I finally figured out how to get this microphone to work properly. I had a month or 6 weeks. I just couldn't figure it out. I'm not really a techie. I'm somebody who allegedly knows how to use technology, but I don't understand why certain things work and don't work. And somehow a setting got mixed up. And it was not registering the microphone. The microphone was turned on. It was plugged in. The audio mixer, everything was plugged in, but it was not registering. And I just played around a little bit, and voila. Every now and then, we have a moment that feels like we are somewhat competent. But today, July 6th, faithful viewers and listeners, marks the 79th birthday of easily, top 10 all-timers in the history of Hollywood, Sylvester Stallone. And when I say all-timers, I mean when you take into account the entire career, the decades a star, the fact that he created two separate franchises where the lead character in those franchises, there are those that would put either or both of them as one of the 10 greatest characters in the history of cinema. Now, I certainly for one of those two, I don't like any of the movies with the slight exception of the very first one. That would be the Rambo series. I'm coming to get you, Murdoch. I think that movie sucks. Rambo 3 sucks. They're all terrible. They're all bad. First Blood is okay. You better remember one thing if you're going to send in that many. What? A good supply of body bags. That's great. First Blood is a pretty good movie. David Merrill, the author, he liked it. If he liked it, I'm okay with it. I can deal with that. But the rest of the series, I'll take them all and leave them. The last one I thought was horrible. I just couldn't get into it. But Sylvester Stallone has had a lot of different careers within the timeline of his actual career. He is somebody who cannot stop moving. He cannot stop working. He can't sit still. And the best representation of that for the average person who's maybe just a casual fan, watch the Sly documentary that is on Netflix. It was created for Netflix. It's not as good as the 3-part Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary. Arnold, for better or worse, was more willing to make himself look really bad, especially in the final third. That was a 3-parter. Goes a lot deeper. That's what she said. But for real, it goes a lot deeper. Arnold was willing to take responsibility for a lot of the things in his life that went wrong, because so many things in Arnold's life went right. Regardless of whether you think he's a terrible guy or he's great or he's somewhere in between, his life is a classic American success story. He dreamed it, he lived it, warts and all, and Arnold was willing to answer very difficult questions, very painful questions, discussions he had with his now ex-wife Maria Shriver that he shared, and he came across like somebody who was more open and willing to get into things that maybe mistakes that he made in his life. And we don't really know if there was any extra footage in the Sly documentary where he did go into explicit detail about his somewhat fractious relationship with his late father, which is really some of the most moving stuff in the documentary. I didn't know any of this, that he and his dad had a bit of a contentious relationship. Like the father he just almost refused to acknowledge just what an incredible success his son had become. Like, just really bad stuff. And there are moments of reconciliation between the two of them which are beautiful, and it kind of make the documentary worth it. But Stallone has always been a bit elusive when it comes to really giving a lot of himself. Not as kind of shy as, let's say, a Tom Cruise. A Tom Cruise is as gregarious as anybody, but there's a lot of stuff you could tell he doesn't want to talk about. So Stallone, it's not that he's unwilling. I just had the feeling that the filmmakers were told, don't push him. Don't push him too hard. You'll see how much he gives you. And he gives a lot. And it is a bird's eye view, a window into what Stallone was going through during COVID and worrying about the family and what was going on with the movie business and when can we all get back to work. But because it's Sly, because it was Stallone, he could not sit still. Even when the business shut down, he took advantage of the time and did something that he had been thinking about. And he had, occasionally would talk about the fact that he shot way more high quality footage for Rocky IV than we got to see in the final version of Rocky IV that was released to theaters, the official version, which, hell, we all love. I mean, it's totally absurd. It's a 90-minute music video, as Roger Ebert said, and he wasn't wrong. Super entertaining. This is us against them. All great stuff. Apollo and Dolph Lundgren as Drago, all great. But Stallone took the time. He didn't regroup. He was thinking of maybe he's going to move, but he worked almost every day to prepare a new cut of Rocky IV. And it's something that it only happened because the movie business shut down and he didn't have anything else to do and it was driving him crazy. He wasn't just going to sit around and paint all day or drink coffee and work out and stick to his 1,200 calorie a day diet or whatever it is that he's, his will is iron. To say that it has a will of iron is to kind of understate just how strong his will is when he wants to do something. Or in the case of, hey, Sly, would you like a slice of cake? I love a slice of cake, but I'm not going to have one. Like that kind of thing. But Sylvester Stallone it's difficult to kind of quantify his career because as big a fan I am of him from a broad sense, he's made an enormous number of really bad movies. Really bad movies. And I'm not even going to put maybe 2 of the Rambo movies I'll put in the category of that I think they're pretty bad. But he was always willing to risk and take risks and move outside of his comfort zone. And this is something where, for example, when you look at the careers of his kind of closest peers, although it's difficult to call Clint Eastwood a peer because Sly is 16 years younger, more than 16 years younger. But you look at the careers of Arnold and Clint Eastwood and Sylvester Stallone. Stallone and Clint would be the closest in terms of actors who also were involved in production. In the case of Clint, a producer and a filmmaker, not really a writer. Stallone was almost like a writer first, or we could say a writer and actor equally, somebody who was involved in the creative process and a filmmaker. Arnold only directed one film. It was an adaptation of the old holiday standard Christmas in Connecticut. And a lot of people thought he showed some pretty good maneuvers behind the camera. There were some clever bits and editing, but he didn't go any further with that. And Arnold was not, he didn't seem as interested in it after making that movie. Maybe it was a pain in the ass. He just didn't want to go any further. But the thing with Stallone, unlike Clint and Arnold, is that when Stallone strayed from his comfort zone, it often didn't work. And that's why he kept going back to the Rocky saga, the Rambo franchise, and action movies. Classic, balls out action movies. And in this case, when I say classic, I don't necessarily mean from the quality perspective, but when we think of movies where shit blows up real good, Sly's made a lot of those. From Daylight and Assassins on down, The Specialist, a lot of them just weren't really very good. But he tried different things, and often audiences rejected. And this is something that you really can't explain, because Sylvester Stallone, for example, is somebody who is naturally very funny. This comes across in the documentary, and anybody who follows his social media accounts, especially Instagram, he is a naturally funny individual. But the humor just didn't translate that well in a lot of movies that should have been funnier. And for example, when Stallone did this movie Oscar in 91, when he was trying to break away from just doing nothing but movies such as Tango and Cash or Lock Up or Rambo 3 or Over the Top or Cobra, he wanted to do something else, and he did this movie called Oscar with Vincent Spano, among others. A young Marissa Tomei, I think, was in that movie as well. And you can see, he's up to the task, but his line readings, they're not quite geared for comedy. And this is something that when you say you can't explain, why would Arnold Schwarzenegger, English was not even his first language, right? Why was his comic timing so good? Why has it always been so good? I don't know. But when Twins was being prepared, people thought it was, well, this isn't going to work. Yeah, we love DeVito, but the Austrian Oak, really, in a comedy? This seems absurd. And then the movie comes out and people are just incredulous that the Austrian Oak steals the film from, I mean, the nominal star should be Danny DeVito, right? Because he was the one with all of the background in comedy, whether it was sketch comedy like Taxi, or whether it was really funny shit like Throw Mama from the Train or Wise Guys, Tin Men, really great comedies. But Arnold had the knack for it. He had the timing. And it must be said, he had a better track record of picking really good scripts than Stallone. Now, I know a lot of people who like the movie Oscar, but nobody will defend his second foray into straight-up comedy, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Now, on paper, look good, right? You got the big guy himself, Sly, and you got Estelle Getty, who was an absolute scream. I mean, most people think that she was the best thing, maybe her and Betty White, but on Golden Girls, what a home run hitter she was, right? She supplied a good chunk of the laughs. But Stallone always wanted to do something different. And there was a time in history where a big movie actor moving to TV, like Rock Hudson did it, Macmillan and Wife in the 70s, it was looked upon almost as an admission of defeat that your movie career proper was now over. Well, with the advance, with the explosion of not just streaming services, but of streaming services contracting writers and creators to produce super high quality material, there's no shame. It's not so much, well, he couldn't hack it in movies. You can do both. You can be in great TV and make great movies. And Stallone in Tulsa King, cliche though this may be, he found himself a new generation of fans. People wanting to see him in that kind of role as basically a high-level mobster. And it isn't just an older actor playing a mobster, because it's Sylvester Enzio Stallone. He brings all of his history in movies with him. And this is something that it's going to go right over the head of, let's say, people under 30. It's not going to land for them. They're just going to take it at face value. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to do what I'm talking about. You don't have to see films on multiple levels. Because I love a good action movie. I don't have to look at, for example, Cobra and try to break Marion Cobretti down into a three-dimensional character. He's not. He's a one-dimensional character. He's a blunt force trauma provider. He provides blunt force trauma one form or another. This is where the law stops and I start. Sucker. But you look at what he tried to do in comedies. It didn't work, so he pivoted back to action. He did Cliffhanger. Great movie, right? Die Hard on a Die Hard in a Die Hard with a, right? Cliffhanger, Die Hard on a mountain. He did Demolition Man, a film which should have been a bigger hit. It is a fantastic science fiction action movie. He did that. Then he did The Specialist with Sharon Stone. Just unbelievable scenery chewing from James Woods and Rod Steiger. Just out of control scenery chewing. Sharon Stone seems like the only trained actress in the film, which is ridiculous. But she's delivering her lines like she's in a Greek tragedy. Sly is giving us an action hero performance. And James Woods is just William Shatner on crack. He's chewing it to such an extent. Man, what great stuff. But he did Judge Dredd, terrible. He did Assassins, decent movie, but it should have been better. He did Daylight. I mean, it's okay, but that was a script that sold for $1 million. Movie should have been better. But you go all the way back with Stallone when he made a porno, Party at Kitty and Studs. And you look at the first part of his career. He has a few laughs with Woody Allen in Bananas. He plays a guy menacing Woody on the train. And then Farewell, My Lovely with Robert Mitchum. Lords of Flatbush with Henry Winkler and Perry King. That's a movie that Quentin Tarantino has talked about. That's where he became a fan of Stallone. He thought that Stallone was the best thing about that movie. But when I mentioned, and I'm sorry I strayed from this, too many colliding thoughts. when I mentioned about an actor bringing his past roles and the weight of his past as hero, villain, anti-hero, whatever the case might be. When you look at Stallone in Tulsa King, do you see Rocky Balboa? Do you see Marion Cobretti? Do you see Kit LaTorra or Ray Quick or Ray Tango from Tango and Cash? Do you see Rocky Balboa, John Rambo, Gabe Walker from Cliffhanger? John Spartan, you are fined 1 credit for violating the verbal moralities code from Demolition Man. Do you see Robert Rath in Assassins? Robert Hatch in one of my favorites, Victory. It's all on you as the viewer. How do you see his character in Tulsa King? What do you take from this now older Sylvester Stallone? Or do you just see that particular character and take him at face value? Where I was going with that, a movie that's going to be celebrating an anniversary in a couple of days. And I mentioned Clint Eastwood. And Stallone has always appreciated Eastwood, but there are things that you can't always explain. Arnold and Sly had their issues. They were never not on friendly terms. I mean, there are pictures of them hanging out in the 80s. It's not like they were enemies and they were, going to take a crack at one another. I mean, when Sly was training for, I think it was Rambo 3, but he used Franco Columbu, who was Arnold's best friend. Like, they were on speaking terms. They were friendly. They had this rivalry. It wasn't like they hated each other's guts. I think Sly kind of might have hated Arnold, but Arnold definitely did not hate Stallone in the 80s. There's no way. But Arnold and Sly ended up becoming very, very close friends in their later era, working together in Escape Plan, which I thought was pretty good. Arnold is the highlight of that film. Stallone doesn't have very much to do. He lets Arnold kind of run away with the movie. But Arnold and Sly became very close, and Arnold and Clint Eastwood have always been close. Stallone and Clint Eastwood are like friends, but they're not that close. And I don't know why. You would think that they worked together on like a Wounded Warrior project in the 80s, not for a movie, but, kind of support the troops, all positive stuff, nothing negative. But the closest they ever got to working together was when Sly in the mid 2000s was starting to kick ideas around for the Expendables. I think while he was working on the Rocky Balboa movie in 2006, Clint was the first person he called. That was the guy that he wanted to be in the Expendables. That was the first name that was in his Rolodex that he called. And Clint was interested, but he was just too busy. He was getting ready to do the Changeling movie with Angelina, and then he had Gran Torino. And he didn't have time. And Sly also pointed out, I think Clint would have wanted to make the movie himself, and it was always Stallone's intention that it was going to be his movie. And so they didn't end up working together. They parted amicably, all of that stuff. But you look at Stallone in the Expendables movies and some of the other roles that are similar to the character of Barney Ross. And by the way, Barney Ross was a famous boxer. That, again, was not an accidental name. That's Stallone paying tribute to a famous fighter I assume he was a fan of from the Henry Armstrong days of the 30s and 40s. But in The Line of Fire, which is celebrating an anniversary in a couple of days, obviously I'm going to do an episode on that. In the world of that film, Clint Eastwood's lead of Frank Horrigan he's probably about the same age as how the character of Frank Horrigan is presented. I think he's supposed to be in his early 60s. He should not still be on presidential detail. He's a Secret Service agent. But we see Clint in that film, if we are, like I was at the time, already a big fan, and now seeing that Clint is still alive, still working at age 95. It's just incredible to think that in The Line of Fire, the guy was coming to the end as a leading man. Oops, not really. But playing a character who is weaker, who is more vulnerable, who is not Dirty Harry Callahan. And Dirty Harry Callahan gets beat around in the first movie a lot. He gets beat around a lot, but he is really tough. And he gets beat around because of circumstances, not because of any kind of sort of failing. By the time of In the Line of Fire, we see an older, slower, still potent, still resourceful, but this is not the same action star of the past. This is an older guy who's probably going to have to use his brain and not just his .44 Magnum or his brawn. So when we look at Stallone as a mob boss who I assume at some point in the show he's going to be put out to pasture. The show isn't going to go on forever. And we just start comparing the roles that Stallone played to this character. And most people I know think the show is, terrific. But you can't just look at him, if you know anything about him, and just see, oh, this is just some older actor playing a mob boss. This is one of the biggest stars in the history of cinema. Right there, Sylvester Stallone. Huge star in the States, huge star in Europe. The quote that I always say, my old NYU professor, explaining how a movie such as The Specialist can be absolute trash. It's not a good movie. I just talked about it. It's a terrible movie objectively. Did okay here in the States, but it cleaned up overseas. It made like 110 million in Europe in 1994. And why? Because in Europe, they line up around the block for Stallone. He was popular around the world. He was a global star, a global icon. And what made him a global icon was Rocky. So he was working the kind of apocryphal story, and I've gotten into this, but for those new to the channel, the apocryphal story is that Stallone was a complete unknown, dead broke. He might have been dead broke, but that he was a complete unknown, and Rocky turned him into an overnight success. That's true depending on how you look at it. But the fact that he was in big movies like The Lords of Flatbush, like Farewell, My Lovely. Again, Woody Allen and Bananas, it's an absolute riot. He's only in the movie for a couple of minutes, but he's fucking awesome. He's like 23 or 24 at the time, and his scene on the train with Woody Allen is just gold. That movie is completely crazy. But he was a working actor is the point. He had been noticed, and he was known in the business. Most of the movers and shakers already knew who he was because of his supporting turn in Farewell, My Lovely, and especially Lords of Flatbush. If you ever wondered how Henry Winkler became the Fonz, how he got that role, how he got the iconic jacket, he wears the same jacket or one very close in the Lords of Flatbush. That also did not happen in a vacuum. So Rocky is the key story, film, screenplay for Stallone. It made him a superstar. It took him from a rising young actor who, he was his first wife, I think was her name Sasha, his first wife, and he was still with her at that time, and Rocky made him a superstar almost overnight. That part's true, but he had a career. He was not a dead-ender who was doing nothing. He was working feverishly. And my guess is he got paid a decent amount for Lords of Flatbush, but maybe he had other bills. Maybe he had spent money trying to, sell Rocky. It wouldn't have been Rocky, but maybe trying to sell himself, maybe traveling around, meeting with producers overseas. I don't really know what he was up to in that era, except for the fact that he was living near Hell's Kitchen. And he had, the dog that he had, which was similar. I don't think it was the same dog that he has in the movie Rocky. But Rocky made it possible for him to go into his sort of first run of being a movie star. And if you look at what I was saying, where he tried to remake himself, he was from the first Rocky through, let's say, Lockup in 1989. Tango and Cash came out the same year. That's a 13-year run with him first on the call sheet, as they like to say, where he's the guy. He's the alpha in almost every one of those movies, even silly trifles like Rhinestone with Dolly Parton. So that was a movie that should have worked. It just didn't. A kind of a tough guy trying to become a country singer. Like that should have been a better movie. He made a lot of lousy movies, but there were the diamonds in the rough. Many people like what he did, Paradise Alley, which was 1978. There are a lot of fans of the movie FIST, where he plays a character as kind of a Jimmy Hoffa. That's a movie that Stallone to this day is still upset that he allowed, spoiler alert, his character to die at the end. It's one thing with Stallone. He hates movies where his character dies at the end. You just can't stand it. Whereas, Clint, also spoiler alert, he's died in a couple of movies, not a ton, but he's died in some of the movies that he's appeared in. And Stallone, other than FIST, I'm not so sure that he has gotten bumped off in anything else. I don't know about that. I don't think so. But he needed to do something else, is the point. Just as Clint Eastwood, where he was making a lot of very successful thrillers, action movies, Eiger Sanction after Dirty Harry, he did the sequel to Dirty Harry, then he did the second sequel to Dirty Harry and the Enforcer, he did The Gauntlet, but Clint did the Any Which Way But Loose movies, showing that he could be funny. And he doesn't look like a guy who would have made anything in comedy that could have been good, but both of those movies were huge box office hits. So you could see that Stallone, a decade after Clint did Every Which Way But Loose, Any Which Way You Can in a 2-year stretch, he wanted to try something else. He was evolving. You know, he had a slightly different look. He changed his hair, he cut a little shorter, and then with Bruce Willis and Arnold, they did Planet Hollywood, and he just had a lot of bad movies. And for those of you who love the Rambo series, I mean, I don't take any issue with that. The movies just don't work. The first one is okay, and I mean, Rambo First Blood Part 2, memorable moment in film school. We saw that class. Speaking of Robert Sklar, it was his class. We actually screened Rambo First Blood Part 2 in American film 1975 to 1990. The joke is, if you had that class now, it would be called American film 2005 to 2020, and that really hurts. Because 1975 to 1990 was relatively recent history in the spring of 1995, which is now more than 30 years ago. But we watched Rambo First Blood Part 2, and we got up to the part where Sly does the iconic, "I'm coming to get you." We were all yelling and carrying on. We were just being typical guys. It's so stupid. If that had been recorded, you would have seen the way that we were reacting. We were pumping our fists. But other than that, the movie is just atrocious. It's just awful. Really, really bad stuff. Great word, jingoistic. Rocky IV was accused of being jingoistic. I would say Rambo First Blood Part 2 was pretty jingoistic too, from a different angle. But I love Stallone. I love the guy. He's a brilliant writer, and he's a really good filmmaker. His direction of Rocky IV, I think, is perfect. And the Rocky versus Drago that I mentioned that he worked on during COVID, I don't think that it's necessarily better than the version that we all love, but it's good and it was worth it. I would say they're both like a 7.5 to 8 out of 10. Incredibly entertaining both. But there were a lot of character moments that he lost when he cut the original version together. The best thing about Rocky versus Drago was that stupid subplot with Paulie and the robot. Was he like romantically involved with the robot? Completely gone from the movie. But he's just somebody who was always striving for greatness. And part of making bad movies is you were daring to be great. He wasn't just making safe choices. Now, there are times where it's a bridge too far, like Clint Eastwood was offered The Killing Fields in the early 80s, said, no, audience won't follow me there. I'm not the right actor for this part. And there probably were roles that Sly took where you could say he wasn't the right actor for this part. Sometimes a story just doesn't work because the script is lousy. But when he was well cast in movies such as Victory with Michael Caine and Pele, it's basically The Great Escape and a soccer film rolled up into one. And I just think it's a fantastic movie. But that role fit him like a glove, where he plays the ugly American and a bunch of European soccer players, or football if you prefer, but soccer players who had been taken prisoner by the Nazis during World War II and stuck into a prison camp in France. Stallone's performance in that movie has a certain vibrancy, and it's one of his 5 best performances, because that particular character actually has an arc and grows and changes. It has a kind of a Rocky arc, where he starts off, he doesn't really give a shit about anyone but himself, but he gains a certain humility, and he still has the competitive spirit, and he ends up being a pretty good goalkeeper. As Pele said, you can be a good goalkeeper, Hatch. There's just too much to talk about in the career of Sylvester Stallone. I barely scratched the surface here, and I don't want to keep you any longer than I need to, but you get it. His career, despite the failures, despite the misfires, despite making a lot of very disposable, guilty pleasure action movies, he still achieved greatness. He's still a multiple Oscar nominee, and I mistakenly thought that he won for screenplay for Rocky. He didn't. It was Paddy Chayefsky who won for network. I don't know how I could have made that mistake, but I was convinced that he won for Rocky, but a multiple nominee. And Rocky did win Best Picture, so he created the story for the movie, which ended up winning Best Picture. It shouldn't have won. Spoiler alert, it should have been Martin Scorsese, Best Director, and Taxi Driver should have won Best Picture for films released in 1976, but that's a whole other story. And I've left out probably 15 Stallone films that I really like, and I'm not going to try to go through his career and give you a count. He is a galvanizing figure, a force in the movie business and now in the TV business. The family Stallone, the show with his wife, I'm glad they got back together. I always thought they made a great couple. And Sylvester Stallone, an all-timer, fantastic writer, a good actor, and a really fine filmmaker, and a character. It's somebody that I'm always interested what he's up to, what he's going to do next. And, if they do another Creed movie where he comes back, I'm on board. I didn't think Creed 3 was up to the quality of the first two, which were really good. It was just okay. Stallone was definitely missed in his signature role of Robert Rocky Balboa. So a happy 79th birthday to the one and only Sylvester Stallone. This has been episode 577 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Sunday evening of July 4th weekend here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then,